Hey there, I'm Brian Smith, the design director here at FullStack Labs, and we're going to take a look at a list of common questions we get about our design process. The first one here is, how do you typically collect requirements in terms of UI and UX design? Well, the first step of every project is a kickoff meeting where we do group knowledge transfer. That means that we have everyone on the client side in the room, and from our side we'll have the design team, the development team, product owner, and a project manager. And we try to get our team up to speed with where your team is already at. So if you've done any initial research or planning, we discuss all of that so that we can get started from where you're currently at. Additionally, we'll do user interviews. We'd like to meet actual users if possible and conduct meetings with them where we can try to gain an understanding of where they're coming from, their goals, the jobs they're trying to complete by using this application. And through that, we develop empathy with them so that during our design phase, we can keep them in mind as we're designing out features. We'll also conduct interviews with subject matter experts, or SMEs. An example of this was we were working with a company called Cytech Biosciences. They do cell flow cytometry. It's basically the process of analyzing cells through lasers using hardware and software. We were able to go and do an on-site meeting with them for a couple of days where we were discussing the process and learning about it from the scientists that actually conduct experiments using their device and using their software. The great thing about that is our team was not a bunch of scientists, so we were able to learn the underlying principles of what it is they're trying to achieve with flow cytometry and with the software, so that as we're designing, we have a base knowledge, a base understanding of their industry and the goals they're trying to achieve. We'll also conduct competitive analysis. So we will look at the competitors in your space and see what they're doing well, what they could improve on. A lot of times this looks like getting demos of the actual software. So we'll get demos from them and actually try the software out ourselves so we can see where your application is going to stack up against the competition. We'll also do a brand analysis. So that assumes that there's an existing brand in place. If you have any initial style guide or outlines for what colors, typography, fonts, illustrations, wording should be used in your marketing materials or in your applications, we'll do a thorough analysis of that to make sure that our designs for the app line up with what your brand is trying to convey. So through this requirement gathering process, we're able to gain industry knowledge to better understand the landscape we'll be designing for. We'll have defined business goals. Those will serve as a benchmark to evaluate the effectiveness of our work. We'll also build out user personas so we can understand where users are coming from, their goals and needs. We'll also define the use cases, which are the how and why users would be interacting with your application. We will also define functional requirements through this process. So that looks like a list of the views that will be included in the app and what can be done in each of those views. We'll take those and we will rate them based on value to user and difficulty to implement and business value. And with the combination of those, we can start to prioritize which features should be designed out first and which features should be implemented first. We'll also work with the development team during this time to get technical requirements. So our dev team will look at any third-party integrations or APIs or open source libraries that'll all be part of this application. A lot of what they discover there will impact how we actually go about designing the app itself. And so during this process, you get a whole write-up of the technical requirements that's handed to you, the client, as well as our design team. What is your process to build an end-to-end prototype based on end-user feedback? So there's a lot of steps in our process for this. We've got feature maps, user flows, wireframes, style concepts, style guides, mocking up core views, building a core prototype, feature-level prototypes, and documentation. There's a lot of ways we can involve users and get their feedback during this process. First, let's have a look at the feature map. The feature map is essentially a high-level outline of the different features or views that will be needed in the application. So in this example, there were 3 different user experiences throughout employees and employers. And you can see that it somewhat looks like a user flow, but it really is just helping to outline the different views that are going to be included in the application, some of the sub views. There are some conditional workflows, and this helps us develop a high-level understanding of how the app is going to function. From there, we will build out user flows, so that's adding a bit more complexity to that flow, involving all of the decisions that could be made during the process and diagramming out exactly how the user will work through those workflows. So in this example, we had a handful of different possible ways that users could sign up and go through an onboarding flow. So we created a diagram for each of those, just indicating exactly how the user will proceed through the application all the way ultimately to their goal. The next step is putting together wireframes. So we will do wireframes for each of the views that is included over in our feature map. And these are just low fidelity outlines of what is going to be included in each view. So you can see we're not really caring too much, obviously, about imagery. Even the text that's going to be included often will be lorem ipsum. The goal here is to just demonstrate the structure of each view as it will be laid out in our high fidelity mockups. This is a great place to get user feedback, especially if you have a core group of users that understands what you're trying to do with this app. They can look at this and have a pretty solid understanding of what is being built here and what's being presented to them. And these can be built in a really quick, efficient method, and getting user feedback this early on is an excellent way to speed up the whole design process. The next step is to create some style concepts. So if your brand already has an existing style guide, we can create concepts based on that. In this example, we created 3 concepts for this application that had an existing style guide. So we were able to use their brand colors and their typography. If you don't have a style guide yet, if you don't have a brand yet, that's fine. We can work with that. We can come up with different concepts for different uses of typography and colors and imagery and present those to you so that we can start down the right direction with what your team is expecting visually in the application. Once you have a style concept selected, we'll build out the style guide. So the style guide will outline things like the typography that will be used throughout the application for the different sizes that are going to be used. It'll also have the colors, not only your brand colors, but we'll have error colors, warning, info, all those sorts of things. And we will include things like the frame sizes for the responsive designs, styling for shadows, spacing that should be used throughout the application, opacity overlays, and all these things that are the underlying base tokens for the designs. Up next, we'll put together mockups of the core views. So for each of the individual views, we'll create designs that are just static mockups, of course at different screen sizes if it needs to be responsive. And with this is a high fidelity representation of what should be expected in the final app. There's no prototyping involved here yet, but you can see that all the components are represented for list items, buttons, cards. Everything is presented in these mockups. So we will create mockups for all of those core views. So core views just meaning what's actually essential to the application. At this point, we're not really worrying about ancillary views like terms of service or privacy policy. But yeah, we get all of these mockups looking great. This is another good spot for user feedback. Using Figma, these can be sent to potential users to review and even leave comments right in the prototype. Additionally, we like to get client feedback on a regular basis at the early mockup stage. Is a great time for it. So we can send you a link to this and you can leave comments directly on the designs in the mockups. When we have the mockups complete, we'll put them together in a core prototype. And the core prototype is essentially stitching together all of those individual views so that a user can navigate around them without performing the detailed interactions. So let me show you how that works here. So here in the core prototype, what we put together is the basic navigation around the app. So you can see all of those blue lines that I was showing you in the design file represent links inside of this prototype. And even though we don't have all of the features fully prototyped out yet, you can see that this is starting to feel and look like a real application. This is another excellent point where you can get user feedback. You can actually share this link directly with your users, and we can conduct either in person or Zoom usability sessions where we give them tasks to achieve within the application, and we can have a set of metrics that we're measuring against and create iterations based off of that feedback. When the team's feeling pretty good about the core prototype, we will start to develop feature-level prototypes. So this goes into all of the edge cases and all of the workflows that can happen with each of the individual views. In this example here, this is a feature that is called chapter detail, and there's quite a bit going on. We've got a search component, we have a sidebar, we also have a right rail that expands out and has multiple states based on a user's selections inside of that. And with this, we're able to prototype out all of the interactions that should be expected for this one feature. So here's a look at that feature prototype in action. Inside this view, of course, we can expand the right rail here, also interact with subviews of it, and collapse. We can activate the drop downs and even look at the subviews of those drop downs. We can also have a look at the search interactions. And so all of this is put together so that a user looking at the chapter detail prototype can know exactly what's expected of it when it goes into development. And using a design tool and prototyping tool like Figma, we're able to send off a link to this exact prototype to users so that they can interact with it themselves and give you feedback directly on this prototype. We can make quick iterations at that point, and doing that inside of a design tool is much more efficient than it is in a development tool. So it saves time, saves money, and really gives us a way that we can work quickly within the designs to get to the point that it's ready for development. And the last step in the process of preparing it for development is putting together the design documentation. So that is all of these markers you see inside of our designs here. And this helps guide the development team in terms of what is expected to happen with each individual feature, as well as where the data might be coming from, what should be happening in loading states or states where there's too much content to be displayed. It demonstrates things like wrapping. And all of this helps the development go a lot faster as well. Of course, we still meet with the development team when there are questions or confusion, but we really do our best to demonstrate what is expected for the developers inside of the documentation. The outcome of this process is that we have high fidelity clickable prototypes, not only for the app as a whole, but each individual feature has a highly detailed prototype for it. We have UX documentation so that it's ready for development, and we have a design and prototype that is optimized based on that user feedback. How does FullStack incorporate an iterative process to building prototypes? Well, the first step in this process is designing based on the assumptions that we have, and those come from the research that your team has done, the user interviews that we've done, the interviews with subject matter experts, and we create designs based on all of that at the start so that we have a prototype to be able to show to users when we want to do user testing. So we can do usability testing remotely through Zoom. Here we've got an example of someone testing out and doing an A/B test between two implementations of a certain feature. So we sent these links to this user who you see going through the process right now, and recorded a Zoom session with them, gave them some prompts, and watched them go through the system. During that process, we were measuring some KPIs, their completion status, the amount of time it took to complete test 1 versus test 2. And from all of this, we're able to gather feedback from a bunch of people, start to identify themes and areas that need improvement or tweaking in the application, and we can iterate based off of that feedback. And that doesn't just happen once. We can go through multiple iterations, conducting multiple user tests along the way to see if there is improvement over the previous implementation of a particular design. We can also go through several rounds of feedback based on your business stakeholders or other people on the client side, all the while testing the changes that happen. Once everyone's happy with where we're at, we'll confirm that solution. We'll build out all of the documentation and final prototypes that are needed so that we can get it ready for development. During this time, we're having weekly client check-ins, so you're seeing the process, you're seeing the iterations take place. We'll also send demo videos along the way so that you can see what is coming out of an individual mockup before we have that weekly check-in, so you're ready with feedback because you had that demo video. And all of this serves to give us more confidence going into development because we have done iterations based on feedback to arrive at a really excellent solution. What skill sets does your design team have? Well, here at FullStack Labs, we have many product designers, and the skills they have are things ranging from user research at the beginning of a project and throughout, user experience design, user interface design, building out design systems, prototyping, and documentation for development. Really, that's everything we need to be able to build out the app all the way from the discovery phase into development. Additionally, when needed, we can also do some icon design, any brand design, and illustrations as needed. Beyond that, if we need photographers or detailed illustrations, we're happy to work with other partners. So how do we get to this? Here at FullStack Labs, we always hire skilled product designers. So these are designers who have demonstrated success in the past all the way through design projects, all the way from discovery in through development. We also hold regular training on best practices, so that can be skills general to the design industry, such as new things that have been released from a design system like material design, or new techniques available in a design tool like Figma. And lastly, really these skills come from putting in the work. All of our designers have completed several design projects successfully and continue to do so every day. How do you arrive at a specific design recommendation? Well, first, we always start with the foundational design system. What we mean by that is there are design systems that have been created by large players in the app design business. Google's material design and Apple's human interface guidelines serve as a great underlying for the ways that interaction should happen within apps, for everything down to how a button should function, to navigation, animation, sound, all sorts of things. So we use their research as a base for pretty much everything we do, and then customize the interface from there. Also core to our process are usability heuristics. So Jacob Nielsen created a set of techniques or heuristics that are used for solving common interface problems. So this covers things like giving users the control to back out of a mistake, to prevent errors from occurring, to keep the user informed of processes that are happening in the interface. There's a bunch more of them, and those really are the backbone for the design decisions that we make and have become intuitive to our designers over time. And as user-centered designers, we understand that people aren't just trying to use your app. They're trying to achieve some sort of goal or complete a job or task that they need to do. So keeping those users' goals at the forefront of our minds while we're designing a workflow ensures that we don't create unnecessary steps during that process. When you have an existing brand, we want to make sure that the designs we create adhere to that brand. We want your users to have a same experience through the app that we're building for you as they do in your marketing platforms or elsewhere. So this includes everything from using the right styles in the colors, illustration, photography, even down to the tone of the language that's used in the interface. And similarly, we try to adhere our designs to the industry standards that your users become familiar with so that they can be efficient right when they get into the app. A key piece of our design recommendations comes from user feedback. So we want to get input from your users during the design phase so that we can quickly iterate on the features and come up with a prototype that works for your users through rounds of user testing. The final piece of our design recommendation is ensuring technical viability. So we'll work alongside our developers to understand third-party integrations or technical limitations that might come up to ensure that what we are designing will work when it goes into development. And the result of all of this is that we have a user experience that's based on research. It follows user expectations both on your brand and the industry, and it accomplishes the user goals. What tools does the FullStack team use for the design process? Well, like many industries, design is evolving quickly, and so are the tools that we use within it. Our current design stack is Figma, which we use for designing all of our high-fidelity mockups, concepts, and prototyping, as well as our development documentation. We use Whimsical, which is an excellent tool for feature maps, user flows, and wireframes. We use Airtable to document requirements, to keep track of user goals, create user personas, do competitive analysis. We use Loom to record our demos that we want to send to our clients or to users. We also use Confluence to write requirements for our development team. We use Jira to keep track of our design work and to measure our progress against our estimates. We use Slack for communication as well as Zoom for communication and having meetings with our users when we need to do user testing. Some other tools we use are Sketch, which is another design tool similar to Figma. If you have a project that's completed in Sketch, we're happy to jump in and continue working on features within it. Also Envision, which is used for prototyping, or Adobe XD. And at times we need to use Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, and a handful of other design tools. What is your process behind building a prototype? Well, here at FullStack Labs, we always start simple. We believe that the most simple solution is almost always the best solution. We also start with the minimal effort needed to convey the intent of the design. So that looks like building out feature maps, wireframes, rapid prototypes to quickly get to a point where we can demonstrate and explain the solution without spending a bunch of time trying to build it out. We always introduce complexity when and where needed. So as we arrive at certain solutions, we'll build out the workflow in the prototype to demonstrate what needs to be shown to users in order to be able to test those out. Lastly, we always want to ensure feasibility. We need to make sure that what we're designing fits within the established timelines, budgets, and technical constraints of your project. How do you leverage your nearshore team in the design phase? Well, for most of our projects, we conduct the discovery and planning phase with a USA-based design lead, then involve our nearshore designers early on for concepts. Now, these are full-time design team members that we work with on a daily basis, and they're actively involved throughout the project. They're working on high-fidelity mock-ups and prototypes and documentation. Throughout this process, I'm there for overseeing what is happening, making sure that it aligns with industry standards, with design system standards like material design guidelines, and with our own FullStack standards. And throughout this process, they're collaborating often both with our entire design team, our development team, as well as the client team. How do you approach designing for React and React Native projects? One of the most important aspects of this is building out a design system. So for a project that is starting with material design as the design system, we review all of the specifications as provided by Google in their material design components. We then take that and build out the components inside of Figma so that we can use them in our design tool for the mockups and the prototyping. Our development team then takes those designs and builds out the components in React or React Native code. That way, we have a full design system where everything is in alignment all the way from the designs to the code. When designing a React or React Native app, it's important to consider component abstraction. So in our style guides, we put together all of the design tokens for things like typography, colors, elevation, and spacing, so that we can use those to then build more complex components. Those design tokens are then used in Figma for things like our typography within a text field and the colors that are applied to it in the different states. Then, using those design tokens, we continue to expand on the complexity with the different states that a component might be in, using the props of color and typography, till we finally get to a complex component that is using everything else that has led up to it. When designing a React Native app, it's understood that it will most likely launch on multiple platforms, meaning things like toggles and checkboxes could differ between iOS and Android, and we always include those in the designs and prototypes we create. We've also built apps that initially launched on a native device for iOS and Android that then expanded out to being a web app, and we're able to reuse those components across the different platforms. So in this example, we had what was called a plan detail for this iOS and React Native app that then was able to use the same components as it expanded out into a web app implementation. And these components are then shared across those different platforms. So our goal when designing for React and React Native projects is that we have a common design and development language so those components look the same both in the design process and the development process. We also want to build out an extensible system that has an underlying of design tokens, color, and typography that can be extended into ever-increasing components. And this design process also helps enable an efficient development workflow because we have all of those underlying pieces of the project. And that's it for our design questions in this session. If you have any additional questions or would like to talk to our design team about starting on your project, drop us a line at fullstacklabs.co. Have a good day.